Hello, class. Welcome to Module 8. Today we are going to talk about groups. This is our learning outcome number 1. Take a few seconds to read it. So, social group is a very important part of our identity. According to the social identity theory, um, group form a core part of your self concept, right? So think about all the groups that you belong to. They probably have some special meanings to you. Whether you consider yourself to be like a UNC student, a Tar Heel, or a member of your friend group, a member of your family, or an American, for example. Um, those are all part of your self identity. And as we belong to a group, we yearn for the acceptance from in group members. So it's one thing to say that I'm part of this group or I'm a member of this group, but it's another thing to be welcome and accepted by members of the group, right? To be viewed as truly like an in group member. And because of that, we do things to signal our memberships to kind of take pride in our membership in the group. For example, you might see people wearing group gear or school gears at like sport events or in daily life to kind of signal the group membership and sort of show pride in the group membership, or to also as a way to express one's identity as member of a specific group. So there's different ways to achieve greater self-worth, right? One way is through our personal identity, um, through our personal characteristic, through personal achievement, right? If we are a hardworking individuals or a talented individual and get personal achievement, that would lead to greater feeling of self-worth. But besides these sort of personal characteristic and achievement, um, social identity, group memberships, and the prestige of the group that we belong to is also a path that lead to greater self-worth in ourselves. And so therefore there's kind of like a phenomena that's called basking in reflective glory or burgeoning. Um, this means that when the group that we belong to or individuals that we are sort of associated with uh, do well or have high prestige or is successful, we typically or people would typically trying to be more associated with these individuals or with the group. Um, and for example, think about when UNC just won a national championship in basketball, in college basketball. Um, the following days, probably a lot of fans would be wearing UNC gears. When when we talk about the school that we went to, we might talk about how good UNC is as basketball. Um, and how long of a tradition UNC has in basketball, right? Um, so the so that is we might enhance in-group prestige by speaking positive about our group, which is called in-group bolstering. But also another way of increasing in-group prestige or the perception of in-group prestige is by derogating the out-group. For example, one way to kind of increase the perceptions of UNC is a good team or is better is a lot of fan would sort of talk badly or derogate Duke team or the Blue Devil, how badly they play, or their coach case have these characteristics that is not very pleasant, etc., etc. So you can think of a lot of examples of these dynamic between group. For example, you can think about online fan groups. There's probably you know, different there are probably different fan groups of different celebrities that sort of against one another. Or think about, political party. There's different group of, Republicans and Democrat online, right? And you can also see this dynamic when there's in-group bolstering, which is people would talk positively uh, about one's group, and then derogating the opposite, the outgroup, to kind of increase in-group prestige. And one of the effect is it would improve one's self-worth to do so, to increase in-group prestige. So there's a question for you guys. Um, these out-group derogation and in-group bolstering activity actually does not, affect like the objective value of the group, but rather our own perceptions of these groups. Why is it important to realize that this is perceptions and not objective? Also, think about where can you see the subjective derogations of outgroups in modern world. Come up with several examples to kind of try to connect this framework to the real world. For example, you can think of politics. What other example can you think of? So, as we talk about basking in reflective glory, right, trying to be associated, try to signal group membership when the group is being successful. There's an opposite of that, which is called cutting off reflective failure, which is called corfing. And basically, it's the opposite of basking in reflective glory. If a group or some individual um, is failing or are not doing so well, people would have a tendency of trying to disassociate themselves from that group or from that individual. So just think about the recent, loss of UNC in the NCAA, kind of, disheartening. Um, we so what some of the behavior that would reflect like cutting off reflective failure would be like, for example, the next day, maybe the UNC students wouldn't wear UNC gear the next day. They would like wear normal clothing, and notice that these behavior are not like a conscious decision to try to disassociate from the failure of the group, but they're rather like unconscious processes, right? So individual might also change their language style to disassociate themselves from the group that is failing. For example, when UNC win, right, we might say, "Oh, we won, we beat Duke," so we say we. But when UNC lose, maybe some student would change their language, would say like the Tar Heel lose instead of the Tar Heel lost instead of we lost, or UNC lost instead of like our team lost. So those are like subtle way that people would try to associate or disassociate with the group that is being successful or being unsuccessful. All right, so this is our learning outcome number 2. So an important question is, when it comes to performance, right? We all want to belong in a group, but when it comes to performance, um, is being, doing something by ourselves better, or uh, doing things in the presence of other people better? So Marcus, Hazel Marcus has a seminal study in the 1970s that showed the divergence of group presence on individual performances. So in this study, the researchers had people tie their shoelace either alone or in a group, right? So people were randomly assigned to tying their shoelace alone or in front of other people. Or they would tie a ribbon behind their back alone, or in front of other people. So this is a 2x2 experiment design. So what did they find? What the researcher find is that when people tie the shoelace alone or tie the ribbon alone, then they would tie the shoelace faster. That makes sense, right? So because tying the shoelace, in front of ourselves is something that we're very used to, so we can do it quickly. However, tying a ribbon behind our back is actually pretty novel. It's a novel task. We're not very used to it, so of course it's a hard task. So it takes longer to do. So when people did these two tasks in front of others, of course it still takes longer to do the difficult task than the easy task. However, if you notice, when people were in front of other, they tied the shoelace faster. However, they tied the ribbon slower, so it takes longer for them to finish tying the ribbon. So what happened here? Basically, what happened is appear that the social context, the presence of other people, would improve the performance of one task that is easy. However, it seems to inhibit or diminish the performance of a difficult task compared to when we are alone. So this result has been replicated in multiple studies, and I kid you not, it has been replicated with cockroaches. So how did the researchers manage to test this hypothesis with cockroaches? Basically, they have the cockroach do a simple task or a difficult task. In a simple task, the cockroaches run in a straight line, and in a difficult task, the cockroaches have to navigate something more akin to a maze structure, right? And to manage the presence of others, they basically either have audiences, other cockroaches around, or no cockroaches around when one cockroach did this task. And what they find is exactly the same thing. With a difficult task, when the roach just have to escape in a straight line, having other roaches around, kind of like in these transparent boxes, the roach ran faster. But when the roach had to navigate a maze, having other roaches around actually increases the time it took for the roach to finish the maze task. So what happened here? To explain this phenomenon, Xia Zhong, who also did the roach experiment, proposed a drive arousal model. So what this model says is that in the presence of other people, our base physiological arousal increase. And physiological arousals here is in terms of energy mobilizations or adrenaline dump, kind of getting the body a little bit more activated, our heart rate a little bit higher. So other people, the presence of other people sort of cause our physiological arousal to be higher. And this have divergent effect on how our task performance of easy or difficult tasks. So when we do some, when there are other people around, we perform tasks that are easy, that we learn, that we know well, better. We perform them better. And so this effect is called social facilitation. However, for novel and hard tasks, when we kind of need to focus, when we need to try to use our system two thinking, right, deliberate thinking, these physiological arousal is distractive and it inhibit our performance. So this is called social inhibition. It make you perform worse at tasks that is difficult when there are other people around. So you can think about many examples. For example, think about free throwing. Right? So if you're really good at free throwing, when there are other people around, it's probably their presence probably boost your performance or keep it consistent. However, when you feel nervous and not confident about your free throwing, having other people around might make you nervous and may make you perform worse. An example, you can think of Shaquille O'Neal. He's famous for missing free throws, but in practice, he does the free throwing just fine. But when he has to play in front of like a large audience, that start to affect his performances. So how does groups influence our attitudes, right? Beside performance, um, and in the 1960 to 1970, there's a series of studies that basically show that people seems to have riskier attitude or behave more risky in the presence of other people, and this is called the risky shift. Right? And the researchers find that groups make riskier decisions than individual. And you can see this in a lot of example. Um, you can think about, or check out like a video from Ridiculousness when they film people do make ridiculous mistake or do like really risky thing and like suffer because of it. And a lot of the context would include other people being around. Or you can think about a lot of example in your real life. I'm sure you have heard of stories of friend or have witnessed somebody, some teenager or some student did some really like risky or like kind of risky or stupid things in like a large group of students or in a party. And so researchers seem to find the same result in the lab. Basically, when they have group make you know economic games, groups tend to make riskier decision than individual. They make riskier bet with more reward, so they kind of have more of an attitude of go big or go home. However, when psychologists look back and sort of examine the methodologies of these study, they find that these study have flawed methodology. Basically, what they find when they review these studies in the lab is that they find that it actually makes sense to go riskier in these lab experiment to make riskier decisions. So this experiment did not you know did not manage to have good design to test the risky shift hypothesis. So once researchers sort of review the study and have more studies, they update our thinking on how groups would influence people's attitude. Right? So it's not that group make more risky decisions. It's more that group sort of intensify whatever attitude that people had beforehand. So this effect is called group polarization. And the initial attitude of people would become stronger after group discussion. So if people feel that they should make risky decisions, then after a group discussion, that attitude becomes stronger. People are more confident in making risky decisions. However, if the people in the group feel that they should be more conservative, make safe decision, bet, fewer money or bet less to stay safe. Then after group discussion, they are more likely to make conservative bet. So whatever attitude that is present initially, that attitude is intensified after group discussions. So Dr. Steve Buczynski, he's a lecturer at UNC. He did a demonstration in class with Psych 260 students, and he had students split into group and then debate a question. And the question is, do you believe in pure altruism? Is there such a thing as pure altruism? So before he divided students into groups to discuss, he would take a measures of like how much people agree or disagree with pure altruism. And it seems like most people sort of share like on average the same attitude, whether later on they say they would argue for yes or no, for and against. At time one, it seems like the two groups that agree or disagree with these statements share the same attitude. Afterward, he has students split into two groups, depends on where they stand. If they think that they would want to argue for, or if they would want to argue against, they would go to those appropriate group, right? And after he has student discussing group, he take the measure again where students stand, and here we can see that the opinions start to diverge. The people who was in like the for pure altruism agree more with the statement, and the people who were in the against pure altruism, they disagree more. And then they have the group start debate one another, and then take a measure again at time three. And now their experience, their attitude toward these issues diverge even more. Even after they have sort of debate and hear the rebuttal from the other side. So what does it say? Basically, these people really have somewhat similar attitude toward pure altruism, but after being split into group and go through group discussions and then debate, it seems to sort of like strengthen their attitude. The attitude becomes magnified and entrenched after group discussions. So this is the group polarization effect. And so I would like you guys to think about some real life examples of how this effect might take place, and so think about why it take place. There's a lot of examples. One of it is the current political divide between Democrats and Republican, liberal and conservatives. But there's other examples that you can think of. With that, this is our essay number 1. Please feel free to pause and read it, and then come back to the lecture. All right, so this is our learning outcome number 3. So how does the presence of the group would influence our responding to different social situations? For example, an emergency situation. So I think this is probably one of the most important thing that we should learn about. And if you remember one thing from this module, it probably should be this this topic. So if you remember from Site 101, 100, you probably might have heard about the bystander effect. Just a quick recap, what the bystander effect is that when there is an emergency, people are more likely to respond to an emergency. For example, somebody like collapse because they have a medical emergency, or when they were attacked, or when they were like when we see somebody in like bloody situations, people would be more likely to help if they were alone than when there are other people around. So this is very counterintuitive, right? Because you think that if there are more people around, the chance of getting help from somebody would increase, but actually the chance of getting help from people decrease when there are more and more people around. And so this is kind of like a very interesting and unintuitive phenomenon that actually happen and have really important real world consequences. So based on the bystander intervention model by Darley and Latane, there are four factors that would influence whether people would help others in a bystander situation when there's a lot of other people around. Um, and these factors is first, in order to get help, other people would need to notice that somebody is needing help. And if you are the person who need help in that situation, you need to get people attentions. Well, if possible, if you're still conscious and able to do something, like you can make noise, you can shout for help, or you can, try to get people to notice you. Um, the second factors is that people around might interpret the situations as an emergency situation. So a lot of the time, when someone's need help, other people don't know what happened. The situation seems ambiguous, right? Um, and it might happen to you as well when you're on the street and you see somebody's lying on the street. It's kind of ambiguous whether they need help or not, whether there's something that happened. So you would tend to look around, and other people would kind of look around as well. And because nobody acts, we implicitly assume that, well, other people must know that something happened and not act. Therefore, I shouldn't act either. Um, but this fall into the traps of pluralistic ignorance, which is everyone kind of just assume that other people know, and because other people don't act, I shouldn't act either. So everybody kind of have the same mindset, and but nobody really, kind of know the mind of other people. So this is called pluralistic ignorance. If you think back about our discussion on social norms, this is an issue, and so this is a trap that we fall into that prevent us from helping. Um, so yeah, so one one tip is just kind of to err on the side of um, making more cautions than less caution. So if we see somebody that seems like they may or may not need help, just assume that they need help. The third factor is somebody has to assume responsibility for helping. And so this is another issues with helping in a group. When there's other people around and there's somebody who needs help, there is something called diffusion of responsibility. Um, we all think that, well, there's other people around, somebody will probably help them, so I don't need to. Um, yeah, but that actually made people delay longer and take longer to actually start helping someone. So if you're the one who need help, um, you should probably like yell that I need help from you in the white shirt or you in the Carolina blue hoodies. Come help me, instead of saying generically like, "Hey, somebody help." Instead of doing that, just identify an individual and ask for their help instead. And if you're the helper, if you're the potential helper, and there's a lot of people around, right? And you think that somebody might need help, don't wait for others. Just assume the responsibility that you're the one who has the responsibility to help, and that would be wise in these situations. So the final step is that, well, you want to help, but you also need to know how to help. So with for example, yeah, probably like practical skill, CPR, or just some basic knowledge of how to react to an emergency situations like calling 911 would be a factors that affect helping in these situations, because sometimes people don't help because they feel like they don't know how to help. So all these four factors, situational factor, would affect whether how quickly people would respond with the assistance that other needs in a social situation. All right, this is our learning outcome number 4. So do people make better decisions in groups? Not always. All right, we probably know of leaders who make really stupid decisions even though they have an entire advisory staff with them. Um, and suboptimal decision making in group is called groupthink. And groupthink happened because of faulty group processes. One of the factors that create groupthink is a strong group identity. When individuals really identify with the group, really feel like they belong in the group, and the group form a strong part of their identity. Um, in these groups, a group with a strong group identity, members might experience feelings of invulnerability because they are very confident in their group processes. So they have a strong belief that whatever is uh, people do in the group really work. The second factors that will influence groupthink would create groupthink is isolations from outsiders, right? So this would mean that the group doesn't have a lot of diversity in membership in terms of ideas. They don't have a lot of sort of like new blood, new ideas injected into the group. So the group would tend to use the same approach to solve different problems, which is called functional fixedness. And this would mean that they would use the same solutions for different problems. Everything looked like a nail. When they have, they would use a hammer to hit everything that looks like a nail, even though it might be a screw. So the third factor is forceful group leadership. So the group with really sort of like dictatorship style of leadership, um, the members in the group would fear to contradict the leaders, or instead of leader, there might be a class of mind guards, um, of portions of the group that are really powerful, that have high tenure, that would hold power in the group and would shut down ideas, new ideas, novel ideas, even before it reaches the leader. So people or members in the group would be likely to bend to the will of one person, of one leader, or of a group of members in the group. So strong group identity, isolations from outsiders, and forceful leadership tend to um, create more groupthink and make the group to drive the group toward making suboptimal decisions. So how would we prevent this groupthink phenomenon in our group? One method is brainstorming. Um, why does it work? So how do we combat groupthink? And one solution is pretty familiar to all of us is brainstorming. Brainstorming help prevent groupthink by motivating people to seek out new ideas, to sort of get away from the routine approach to solving a problem or to make a decisions. Right? So if you think back on the former slide, one problem with groupthink is functional fixedness, which is people use the same kind of approach to solve new problems, and the group is sort of isolated from outsiders, so they don't have new ideas. So brainstorming helps to combat this by exposing or motivate people to seek out new ideas and new ways to solve a problem. However, brainstorming is not, is not without issues, without error. There's pitfalls with brainstorming that kind of make this practice less effective and efficient. So the first issues is effort norms, right? Effort norms can make brainstorming less effective. What is effort norms referring to? Basically, it means that if there's a lot of people in doing the brainstorming in a group, there might emerge a norms or a perceptions that, well, because there's a lot of people are doing the brainstorming, I don't have to think too hard. So this is sort of similar to responsibility diffusion. The second problem with brainstorming is that people might have evaluation apprehensions. It means that, well, I don't want to look or sound stupid in front of other people. So if I have this idea that I'm not so sure about, I'm kind of apprehend as if to speak up. Um, and so the group brainstorming process may not generate as many ideas, as many novels and useful ideas because everyone don't want to sound stupid to propose the new ideas to the group. The third problem with brainstorming in the group is coordination loss. So if we do a group brainstorming and we have 10 people and everyone is trying to speak up, it's really hard to coordinate. And so not all of the ideas will get heard. Maybe the ideas from the person who is most outspoken will be heard, and then from people who are more quiet, they might not get as much chance to mention their ideas. So it's difficult to get all the good ideas or all the ideas out when we brainstorm in a group. So how do we solve this? So to solve this problem, there's a simple solutions. Is we when we brainstorm in a group, we should start with brainstorming individually. So everyone will try to come up with as many ideas as possible by themselves, on themselves. Right? Maybe record these ideas in a piece of paper or in a document, and then in a group, we would bring these ideas together and then discuss and collaborate um, on which ideas are the most feasible or the most effective or the best ideas. So this solve all of our problems, right? So when people brainstorm on their own, they have less of a diffusion of responsibility by thinking that, well, other people are brainstorming and speaking, so I don't have to think as hard. It's also solve the problem of evaluation apprehensions because you, especially when you make the ideas sort of anonymous, right? So if you just submit your ideas anonymously, you don't have to fear that other people don't like your idea. And it's also solved the issues of coordination loss because everyone is able to get their ideas out there without speaking over one another. All right, so those are some tips for brainstorming in group and to combat groupthink. This is our learning outcome number 5. So let's continue to discuss group performance. Is group performance a function of individual characteristic? So how well the team performs directly related to individuals' talents and hard work, or are there more to team performance? Is team productivity something larger the sums of individuals' productivity? So a study by Jones in the 1970 actually shows that group outcomes are situationally depend. The researcher studies two kind of teams, baseball team versus basketball team. And what they find is that for baseball team, the success of the team is 97% of the team performances can be predicted by individual performances. So they use some statistical procedure, specifically regressions, and they find that if you use all of the individual performances, you can predict 97% of the variations in team performances. So in other words, in baseball, team performances are very highly related to individual performances. However, for basketball, only 35% of the team performances can be linked to individual talents or performances, right? So it really depends on the context. So for basketball, it seems like for the sport of basketball, individual, there's something more to the team performance than just pure individual talent. It might be synergies among the players, how well they coordinate, how much they like each other, etc., etc. So how do we sort of model productivity in team? How do we get to productivity in team? And there's an equations that get us to the productivity in teams. That is actual productivity in teams equal potential productivity of the team of the members minus process loss. So these are the loss in productivity due to working in team plus process gain. So these are the extra productivity that you can gain by working with other people. So let's talk about what kind of group losses, what kind of process losses do we typically encounter when we work in a team, right? So what kind of productivity, how do we lose productivity by working in a team? And Ringelmann in the 1913 he observed that when oxens pulling in teams, they didn't pull to the full potential of each individual oxen. So let's imagine if one oxen pull 100%, two oxen actually did not pull 200%, but they pull sort of less than 200% of their potential strength. So he did an experimental investigations. Right? He has people come into the lab and they would pull on a rope that is connected to a force sensor to see how strong, how much they can pull and how strongly they can pull. And so people would be instructed to pull on the rope in individually, in group of 2, group of 3, or group of 8. And what the researcher found is that for one individual, right, they would pull to 100% of their strength. That would be like the benchmark. However, for two individuals, the average strength of two individuals is only 95% of their full potential. When there are three individuals, the average potential of productivity is only 85%. And then where there's 8 individuals pulling the rope, everyone's only pull on average 37% of their potential strength. So what happened here? So it seems like the more people are doing or working on something together, the less they're pulling their weight. So what happened here? So there's two kind of factors that would lead to loss of productivity when people are working in a group. The first kind of loss would be coordination loss. So people will find it harder to coordinate in a group than when they work with themselves, right? So that's why their productivity decreases. And there's a seminal study by Kelly in the 1960s when the study is actually probably will not be approved according to current day, research ethical standard. But back in the day, Kelly was able to do it. And so what the researcher did is he had people hooked to some kind of electric shock device, and this was real electric shocks, not fake one like in the Milgram study. And so he either has people hooked to the electric shocks and do a task by themselves, or in group of 2 or in group of 3. And in group of 2 or 3, basically these people has to follow a certain commands, press some buttons to avoid electric shocks. And when people are in group, they have to coordinate with each other on how to follow the command, what button to press, when to press them to avoid getting electric shocks, right? So people either do this alone or with other people. And as you can guess, when there are more and more people, it's harder and harder to coordinate following the commands. So this group of people get shocked more and more, right? So this is not a problem of motivations. So all of these people in group of 1, 2, or 3 are all motivated to avoid being shocked, right? So the problem here is it's harder to coordinate in a group. The second problems um, of reduced productivity in group is motivation loss. So Latane basically study the phenomena of social loafing. And so basically the gist of it is that when there are other people um, doing the same thing that I do, then I don't have to do it as much, or I don't have to do it at all. So people, their motivations to perform, to produce output, get diminished when there's other people around helping them, or working in a group. And we tend to have a tendency of trying to get away with doing as little as possible in group work. I'm sure you guys are probably have some kind of experience with group work when there's that one member that didn't pull their weight in group work. So two kind of process losses. One is coordination loss. The second type is motivation loss that would lead to reductions in group productivity. All right, so let's talk about process gain. This is your learning outcome number 6. Yeah, so not working in groups also has its benefit, right? It's not always like, oh, group work is terrible. There's definitely benefit gained by collaborations and working in a group. And so how do we gain the benefit of working in a group? So here's some factors that would improve group productivities, and correspondingly the tips that you can do to make your group work more productive. And the first tip is to break tasks, break projects into achievable tasks, and then make the task relevant to each individual persons in the group. And because the task, if we make the task relevant to the individuals, people will have more motivations to work harder on the task. They'll have more intrinsic motivations to perform well and completing this task. For example, let's say you're doing a collaborative research project. You can break the research project into multiple parts. Maybe there'll be someone would be writing introductions, someone would doing the method, someone would do statistical analysis, someone would write the discussions, and we would assign these tasks to individual who find the task like interesting or sort of suitable for their expertise or their skill. And that's one way to increase group productivity. The other factors that affect group productivity is group identity. So the stronger the group identity is, the more committed people would be to pursue the collective goal of the group, and the better they will perform. And so the way to establish a strong group identity is to set norms. So set clear norms for working. For example, being on time, submit things by deadline, communicate your difficulties, and or being respectful to other members. So when there's clear norms of working in a group, people would have a stronger group identity and would work better together. Similarly, setting standard for the group work, like what kind of standard of performance would the group accept, right? What is what is the quality of the work that everyone should strive to achieve? And then make the communications among the member easier. Right? So maybe establish like some quick channel of communication through Slack or through other forms that sort of help information flow easily among members and make member feel like communications is easy and everyone is in sync with one another. And so this also serves to establish a good group identity, but setting norms, setting standard, and making communication easy is in itself also make the reduce coordination losses and make everyone more productive. The third factor is goal setting. To be more productive, we should set specific and difficult goal for the group. So this is important for individual work, but is even more important for group work. For example, instead of setting goals such as, oh, let's do a good project together, we can get more specific goals. For example, we want to do the best project in the class, indicated by grades, or we want to get our project to be voted by how many people, or we want to get like a specific score or a specific outcomes for this project. Right? So set specific and challenging goals for the group. And finally, we could diversify the group to increase group productivity. So we should try to diversify the group as much as possible up to a point. Right? So diversity of the group has a curvilinear relationship to group productivity and performances. If the group is too diverse to the point that people have nothing in common with each other, think of an extreme example. Let's say you gather a team of people from like different nationality who don't speak a common language, right? So in that case, it would be impossible for the team to communicate with one another. Therefore, they couldn't work together. So that's just an extreme example, but it shows that if the team is way too diverse and people don't have something in common with each other, it's not going to work. So we need diverse team, somewhat reasonably diverse team. And the benefit of diverse team is that we can have counterpoints. So in a team, when there's only one way of doing things, and the team is very homogeneous, everyone is really similar, then we might follow like a wrong approach or a suboptimal approach. But in a diverse team, we can hear like counterpoints, diverse opinion from other people that would improve decision-making process. Similarly, we might have more elaborative information such as, which basically mean that diverse group will be able to think of different alternative solutions or different alternative informations to help solve a problem or to perform a task. And that would result in a more creative performance of the group because diverse individuals would contribute diverse perspectives to the group and make the group performance more creative. All right, so having discussed those, this is our essay options number 2. Feel free to pause the video and read the essay options, but this is the end of our lecture for Module 8.